The labor movement. The labor movement was an ongoing event that occurred from the mid-1800s to about the late 1900s. The labor movement was started by unhappy wage earners. These employees were unsatisfied by the way they were treated by corporations. Big corporations were underpaying workers that were working in harsh conditions for long hours. These workers were fed up with the way they were being treated. Children, women, and immigrants were among the very many that were being treated unfairly. This is the time when unions were created. What is a union? A union is an organized group of workers who come together to make decisions about the conditions of their work. Being a part of a union allows workers to impact decisions about their wages, work hours, benefits, health and safety, and other work-related issues. Unions allowed the average worker to have power that would enable them to have a say against management. One of the first biggest unions in the United States was founded in 1869. 6 men formed together to create one of America's biggest unions, known as the Knights of Labor. One of the founding men was Samuel Gompers. Samuel left after being annoyed of the way the union was organized, so he created the next biggest union, known as the American Federation of Labor. The American Federation of Labor was founded in Columbus, Ohio, 1886.
When I was young, I attended a Jewish free school where I received a basic education. However, 3 months after my 10th birthday, I was removed from the classroom and sent to be an apprentice cigarette maker. At the age of 14, I became a part of the Cigarette Makers Local Union Number 15, which was the English-speaking union of cigar makers in New York City. After my years in the English-speaking union, I began to move up the union chain, where my experience in the industry had led me to the position of president of the Cigarette Makers International Union, Local 144, and that was in the year 1875. I remember the time I nearly lost my job at this point in my career. The Cigarette Makers Union nearly collapsed in the financial crisis in 1877, at a time where the unemployment skyrocketed. This is when my friend Adolf Strasser and I used Local 144 as a base to rebuild the union. The high dues structure was then introduced to pay out of work benefits, sick benefits, and death benefits for good standing union members. I told people the truth, and that was that capitalists were only interested in profits, and that's it. And the only way to get what we want is to assert our rights as working men. I went on to be the first vice president of the Cigarette Makers International Union in 1896. My commitment and energy went a long way in the funding of the American Federal Union of Labor. So, by being elected president of the AFL, founded in 1886, which is one of the first federations of labor unions in the United States, I hold a great responsibility for making sure biased action didn't surpass in the American workforce against the American workers. All in all, in relation to the Great Gatsby, on page 18, Tom broke out violently with The Rise of the Colored Empires, which was a book describing the rise of the colored people, which were mostly immigrants in the United States. Tom also states that if we don't look out, then the white race will be utterly submerged. In other words, with the help of people like me, these colored empires are starting to gain their rights. This does not look good for business owners such as Tom, but is more beneficial to the working class and the laborers classified as the colored empires. Overall, we can see that through the work I have done, I've even had a major effect on the Great Gatsby when it comes to labor control and the great effect it has on the upper class, which is a class which in the book revolves around many of its major characters.
My name is Darnell Lewis, and I am the president of the United Mine Workers of America, elected in 1920. I am also one of the head leaders, along with Samuel Gompers, for the American Federation of Labor. We are union leaders, and together we believe in the rights of the working class. We must end this war between the working class and our employers. We must abolish inequality for all mankind. These bad corporations are taking power and control over the working class, leaving us to be slaves. A man is supposed to be working to live. Instead, we have our men living to work.
We're afraid to go to work. Afraid of what? Afraid of the arrogant and the insolent economic, political, and financial power of this group of Southern operators and the communities that they rule. Afraid of what? Afraid to desert 145,000 men who are members of this union and leave them to the tender mercies of these arrogant and insolent gentlemen who do not hesitate to suborn public officials in their communities, to police their communities with privately hired and armed gunmen, to evict our people from their homes, so that they'll have no domicile. They have none except those owned by the company. And to close their commissaries and company stores, to cut off food supplies for our people and leave them to their mercy, to cut off water and electric light, and to cut off medical attention. Because they own it. Yes, I'm wondering, Senator, where the war is today. And apparently, we have plenty of aid to give stricken peoples anywhere in the world except in the mining regions of this country.
Fitzgerald shows readers and the rest of the world what it's like to be a worker. He shows everyone the difference in class and how the rich people like Tom, Daisy, Gatsby, and the whole lot didn't care for nobody but themselves. Take a look at the Valley of Ashes on page 26. This is a Valley of Ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the form of chimneys and rise in smoke, and finally with the transcendent efforts of ash-grey men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. Occasionally, a line of gray cars plows along an invisible track, gives out a gash to creek, and comes to rest, and immediately the ash-grey men swarm up in clean space and struck an impenetrable cloud. Fitzgerald uses this imagery to show the reader about the ash-grey men in the Valley of Ashes. Why is this Valley of Ashes so gray and dull? Well, these ash-grey men Fitzgerald is making reference to are mine workers. These mine workers work hard to mine coal for the use of energy. This coal was transported by train, and it was also the resource that powered these trains. Coal was an important resource in my time. When you burn coal, what's left of it is ash. Henceforth, the Valley of Ashes is called the Valley of Ashes because it was a working site for mine workers. That is why the men are covered in ash. Now, these are the men that I fought for. That is why I created the United Mine Workers Association. This union was created to fight for the betterment of mine workers. Mine workers were poorly treated. If a mine worker died in a work accident, his wife, which is now a widow, would have to find a replacement for her husband. Whether it be her 7-year-old son, if she didn't even have a son, she would have to find someone else. And if she didn't find anyone to fulfill her husband's position in 24 hours, she'd be evicted. This is the reason I fought for these workers and why I created the union. Fitzgerald shows how the 1920s was the time period where inequality was primarily a dominant problem in society, especially for the working class.